thank the chair and the ranking member for holding this important hearing, and thank you, Chair Powell, for appearing before the committee today. Before I begin, I'd like to ask permission to enter into the record editorial by the Las Vegas Sun entitled "Economy Infrastructure Thrive When Dems Have the Reins," dated June 16, 2023.
Without objection.
During this time of increased economic uncertainty, it is more important than ever that the Federal Reserve fulfills its dual mission of maximizing employment and supporting price stability. There is no doubt that it is difficult, and the needle that has to be threaded is very specific. However, the human cost is simply too great for us to get this wrong. Sometimes we need to be reminded that there are real people behind the economic data and that the actions taken by both Congress and the Fed have real consequences for everyday Americans. Everyday Americans who want to know that myself and my colleagues are dedicated to creating an economy that actually works for them, which is why I was pleased that last week the Federal Reserve decided to pause your interest rate hikes and take stock of the overall economic picture. Now, don't get me wrong, there's certainly more work ahead of us, but with 13 million jobs added since President Biden took office, we should be rooting for America to succeed and not to fail. The strength of the labor market continues despite the multiple concurrent shocks that continue to reverberate throughout the global economy. And I believe our economy remains resilient thanks to the historic investments that were included in the legislation passed last Congress and signed into law by President Biden. These beneficiaries of these investments were the people, the middle class, not special interest. The bipartisan infrastructure law is creating construction jobs and projects that will help ease supply chain challenges and ensure safer transportation for everyone. President Biden and congressional Democrats are investing in technology that will define the 21st century, components to generate solar and wind energy, semiconductors, and electric vehicles that will all be made here in America. Just last week, Treasury Secretary Yellen was before this committee and described how the transformational investments from the Inflation Reduction Act are ushering in a renaissance of domestic manufacturing. These are good-paying jobs, union jobs, that are expanding our production capacity here at home while reducing our reliance on goods imported from abroad. As I indicated in the editorial by my hometown newspaper, the Las Vegas Sun, remarks that annual investments in manufacturing construction has more than doubled its pre-pandemic levels. Furthermore, when we narrow the focus to the region, including Nevada, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates that in just 2 years, private manufacturing construction increased almost tenfold. So if we want to rebuild the American middle class, we must do so from the middle out and by investing in modern infrastructure and modern manufacturing facilities. But this does not mean that everything is improving equally. I've heard time and again from my constituents about the cost of housing being one of their biggest pain points. The Monetary Policy Report points out that housing services prices have risen a shocking 8.5% over the 12-month period ending in April, and in my district, it's even worse. So, Chair Powell, at a time where it has become increasingly difficult for working Nevadans to purchase a home, I worry that rising mortgage rates will put working families even further behind on accessing the wealth and equity that a house provides. While higher rates have cooled some housing markets across the country, what do you see as the biggest remaining upward pressure on housing services, and what can we do in Congress to incentivize new home starts to hopefully moderate the imbalance between supply and demand in the housing market?
I think you're talking about largely longer run factors here, and I think there has been for some time a shortage of housing. It's harder to get lots, it's harder to get workers, and in the pandemic it had been harder to get materials and things like that. So there's certainly a need for more housing. I think during the pandemic you had people wanting to live in houses rather than downtown in apartments because of COVID. You had low rates, and so you had 2 or 3 years of very, very high price increases for housing, and now that is flattened out a lot as we've raised rates. And
Gentleman's time has expired. The